Disabilities in the courts. Here we will learn and discover how the disabled came to gain many of their rights and opportunities by using the U.S. court system. Let's begin. 1954, Brown v. Board of Education. Brown v. Board of Education was a court case that challenged the previous court case, Plessy v. Ferguson. Plessy v. Ferguson established that separate was equal in all public services. In this court case, parents band together to make the case that separate is not equal due to the lower quality of many of the black schools. The case was taken to the Supreme Court. The finding of the court was that separate is not equal. This was not only key for race, but also students with disabilities. This would be the first step towards inclusive classrooms for the disabled. This precedent of separate is not equal would be used in future disability court cases to improve disabled rights. This would allow for the disabled to receive equal education in public schools, as well as inclusion within the classroom. 1970, Diana v. State Board of Education. Diana was a Spanish-speaking student in Monterey County, California. She had been given an IQ test that was written in English. When she had failed the test, she was placed in a class for the slightly mentally disabled. She took her case to the Supreme Court. Her court case was that students cannot be placed in special education classrooms based on culturally biased tests. The ruling that the Supreme Court found was in favor of Diana. It ruled that students cannot be placed in special education classrooms based on culturally biased tests. These biases include such things as language, regional knowledge, and socioeconomics. This allowed for fair testing for all children, and it kept our country an ethnic melting pot. This allowed for equal opportunity for all peoples in the American school system. Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children, PARC, versus the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children, or PARC, was an association advocating for the disabled to be allowed in the public school systems. Prior to this case, the disabled were not permitted in public schools due to the high costs of having them and having to support their needs. They brought their case to the Supreme Court stating that to deny a student with a disability an education violates their 14th Amendment rights. The ruling found by the Supreme Court sided with PARC and established that any public school system that denies a student with a disability access to their school is to not deny them their 14th Amendment rights. This would set the precedent found in the IDEA's Free and Appropriate Education Clause, or FAPE. This would be the main case to use the separate is not equal to support public education for the disabled. 1977, Larry P. v. Riles. Larry P. was a black student in California whose case would expand the previous ruling of Diana v. State Board of Education. Larry P. had taken a standardized IQ test and due to his poor score had been placed into a special education classroom. He made a case to the courts that the standardized IQ test is not only biased based on language, but also on race. The ruling the court would find would be in favor of Larry P. They would rule that the standardized test is not only culturally biased based on language, but is also racially biased. This is because that many of the standardized tests are geared for middle-class whites who receive very high funds for their classes and get the right amount of education to be able to successfully take these standardized tests. Minorities don't usually get the full education as many as the middle-class white Americans. This would formally end the use of the formal IQ test and the placing of students into special education classrooms. 1982, Board of Education v. Raleigh. The parents of a deaf child, the Raleighs, wanted their child's district to provide a full-time interpreter with her in all of her academic classes, so that their daughter may receive the same education as everyone else. They argued that this was necessary for the school to provide so that she had an equal educational opportunity. Their argument was while a deaf student can read the notes the teacher is given, they are missing out on key discussions and student interaction that happens in all classrooms. They would miss out on key questions students would ask to better explain possible notes that a student did not clearly or that a teacher did not clearly explain. The ruling of the court decided that under FIT, the Rowley's daughter should receive this interpreter. They saw fit to give this interpreter because without one, the Rowley's daughter was not given the same equal educational opportunity as her hearing peers. This would lead to the inclusive classrooms we see today. 1988, Honig v. Doe. Honig v. Doe arose out of the San Francisco school districts and was a landmark case for the emotional disorders. Doe was an emotionally disturbed child who, because of his violent and disruptive behaviors within school, was about to be expelled. At the hearing of this, Doe's parents sued the school district. They believed that because his behavior was caused by an emotional disturbance, that schools could not expel him because this would violate his free and appropriate educational rights. The court found that schools could not expel a student with an emotional disorder because of their conduct. Since this was a disorder, an expulsion meant a change of placement, and it was not up to school superintendents, principals, or teachers to change this student's placement. There had to be a parental hearing and school board approval. Because there was no school board approval, this changed the ruling that students with an emotional disorder could not be expelled unless there was extenuating circumstances. 1992, O'Berty v. Board of Education. O'Berty was a boy with severe Down syndrome whose parents wanted him to feel and be more included in the everyday activities of school. Schools were constantly placing him in segregated schools, much as they had done in the school systems before Brown v. Board of Education. When they did allow him in with his peers, there was little to no support systems for him, as in teacher aides or cooperating teachers. His parents sued, saying this style of education was extremely restrictive on his educational development. The ruling of the court found in favor of the O'Bertys. They stated that segregating a student to separate classroom because of his disabilities was restrictive and did not provide a free and appropriate education. This would be the start of full inclusive classrooms with students with disabilities inside typical classrooms with their peers. 1999, Cedar Rapids Community School District versus Garrett F. Garrett F. had a severe physical disability that required constant medical care. His school district felt that providing his medical care did not fall under the Related Services section of the IDEA, so they did not have to provide it. Garrett F.'s parents felt that they did indeed need to provide it and sued the school district. Ruling. The court found in favor of Garrett F., stating that it was the school's duty to provide medical assistance to students with disabilities under IDEA. Some of these medical services that schools needed to provide for their students would be injections for treatments, such as insulin for diabetes, asthma treatments, such as inhalers, and medications, such as ADD medication or other types of pill forms. They did draw out, though, that it was not the school's job to provide medical services if those services had to be done by a physician or a medical doctor. Those are the major Supreme Court cases that have aided the disabled in gaining a free and appropriate education, as well as to be included and to have the least restrictive classroom setting so that they may fully flourish and function with their peers